All stories on this channel are original works of fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental. My name is Shen Yu, but inside the archive, they call me the Raven Archivist. I collect the cases that official reports could never fully explain. Missing people, forgotten villages, closed roads, old photographs, witness statements. Names that appear where they should not exist. Most people call them ghost stories. I call them files. And tonight, I am opening one of them for you. Welcome to the Raven Files. What follows is the preserved account of a young Taoist named Xue Mang. His words were recorded exactly as they appeared in the original file.
My master once told me that the most dangerous places in the world do not always look dangerous. People avoid a house when they hear crying inside after midnight. They avoid a grave when the earth above it has been disturbed. But a small shrine hidden in the mountains is different. Its roof may still be intact. Its door may still be open. There may be an altar inside an incense burner and old offerings covered in dust. To most people, that looks sacred. And sacred things make people lower their guard. But not everything placed on an altar is a god. Some shrines are really graves. Some incense is not burned for peace. And some promises take only a second to make, while the dead may wait an entire lifetime to collect them. My name is Xue Mang. At the time this case began, I was still living at a Taoist temple in the hills. Then a fire burned through nearly 1/3 of the compound. When my master counted what remained in the donation box, he was silent for a long time. Eventually, he called me over. He handed me an old compass, a chipped peachwood sword, and a cloth bag filled with ritual tools. "Go down the mountain," he said. "What am I supposed to do? Earn money for the roof. Why me? Because you eat the most." That was how I found myself pushed into the city with 2 responsibilities. I had to support myself, and somehow I had to help rebuild the temple. I set up a small wooden table beneath an overpass on the west side of town. On it, I placed 3 old coins, a traditional almanac, and a sign that promised readings for questions about fortune and relationships. For 3 days, no one asked me about either. The only person who stopped was an old man who wanted to know whether I bought scrap bronze. On the 4th morning, I was packing up to find lunch when a middle-aged woman hurried toward me. Her brown coat was wrinkled. Her hair had been tied up in a rush. Her eyes were swollen from days without sleep. The moment she saw me, she dropped to her knees. "Master Xue, please save my son." I stepped around the table and pulled her up. "Please do not kneel. I am too young to accept that kind of respect. Tell me what happened." Her name was young Su Qing. She lived in Qinghe Village, a little more than an hour from the city. Her husband was young Xue Mang. Their only child was a 23-year-old man named Yang Li. Yang Li had always been healthy. He worked at a farm equipment repair shop in town. He was quiet, rarely drank, never smoked, and had no history of serious illness. But 6 days earlier, after the night of the ghost festival, he had begun to change. At first, he simply stopped sleeping. Then, he started waking shortly before 2 in the morning. Each time, he sat perfectly still, facing west. By the third night, he could no longer remember what he had done after sunset. Every morning, Yang Li woke with the bitter taste of incense ash in his mouth. He also smelled candle wax, even when no candles had been burned near him. His parents took him first to the county hospital and then to the city. An endoscopy found mild irritation in his stomach. There were traces of white paraffin wax and plant ash inside him, but not enough to explain his condition. Blood tests, brain imaging, and an electroencephalogram found nothing that matched the severity of his behavior. During the day, Yang Li could still speak normally, but after sundown, his eyes gradually lost focus. He searched for leftover rice, ritual cakes, white candles, and objects that had once been placed on an altar. The sentence that frightened young Su-hong most was the one he repeated every night. "Do not close the door. She is still waiting." I asked young Su-hong how she had found me. "A relative named Yang Lijuan," she said. "She told me you helped her last year." I remembered the case. Young Lijuan had rented an old room, stopped sleeping, and begun seeing a figure in a mirror. I moved the mirror away from the bed, burned a little calming incense, and told her to see a doctor. Somehow, by the time the story spread through the village, I had become a Taoist master who defeated a demon living inside glass. I looked at the bundle of money young Su-hong had placed on my table. "I will come with you," I said. "But if this is an illness, you will continue following the doctor's instructions. I am not a replacement for a hospital." She nodded quickly. "Just come and look at him." The Yang family home stood at the edge of Qinghe Village. 3 buildings formed a square around an open courtyard. The main house faced south. The kitchen and grain storage were on the east side. A room on the west had been used for broken furniture, farm tools, candles, and ritual supplies. The first thing I noticed after entering the courtyard was not cold air. It was a smell, a faint trace of burned wax mixed with damp earth and disinfectant. It did not smell like a candle that had just been extinguished. It smelled like wax that had soaked into old wood over many years and was now being drawn back out by moisture. Young Jibang was waiting in the courtyard. He was in his 50s, short, sun-darkened with rough hands. Unlike his wife, he revealed very little emotion. He looked at me and said only one thing. "My son is in the west room." "Why is he not in his bedroom?" I asked. Young Jibang did not answer immediately. Young Su-hong answered for him. "He keeps going back there. We moved him twice, but in the middle of the night he returned. The doctor gave us a mild sedative and told us to watch him. We locked the outer door so he could not wander off. I asked them to open it. I did not step inside right away. The curtains had been drawn and the room was dark. Young Lee sat against a wooden cabinet in a gray t-shirt and dark pants. 14 broken pieces of white candle lay on the floor in front of him. He was arranging them in 2 straight rows, 7 on the left, 7 on the right. When the door opened, he looked up at his mother. "What time is it?" "Almost 11. Is it day or night?" "It is morning." He released a slow breath, as if he had been holding it for hours. Then he looked at me. Suspicion appeared in his eyes. "Who are you? Name is Xue Mang. Your mother asked me to come. I do not need a Taoist." Then think of this as an ordinary conversation. I sat about 6 feet away. "Do you remember the night of the ghost festival?" Young Lee did not answer. He pushed the final candle piece into place. The 2 rows formed a narrow path from the doorway to where he sat. "What are you building?" I asked. "The way in." Into what Young Lee slowly raised his head. "The bridal chamber." Behind me, young Su-hong made a broken sound in her throat. Young Lee flinched as though waking from a dream. He swept the candles aside and pressed himself against the cabinet. I do not know why I said that. I did not force him to continue. Instead, I studied his right hand. A thin red mark began at his little finger and circled his wrist. It looked like a thread had been tied there for days, but the skin was not cut, swollen, or bruised. I asked to see his hospital records. The reports confirmed that Young Lee had been admitted at 3:12 in the morning on the 16th day of the 7th lunar month. His vital signs were mostly stable. The unusual incident happened on his second night in the hospital. At 1:40 in the morning, a transformer malfunctioned. The inpatient wing lost power for 7 minutes before the backup system came online. When the lights returned, Young Lee was no longer in bed. A nurse and his mother found him in the ground floor emergency stairwell. He stood before a locked steel door with both palms pressed against it. He kept saying that someone on the other side was calling his name. Security footage could not show how he had left his room. The image was corrupted for exactly 7 minutes. When they found him, Young Lee's body temperature had fallen to 94.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet the little finger of his right hand was unusually warm. A nurse found a piece of rotting red thread curled inside his palm. Young Su-hong insisted it had not been there when he entered the hospital. I asked whether anything else had been found in the stairwell. She hesitated. There was a dead rat. Had he bitten it? It was lying several feet away. The animal had no visible wounds. Later, hospital staff found a small amount of incense ash inside its mouth. No one could explain how it had gotten there. That detail changed my understanding of the case. Young Li was not simply being driven by hunger. Something was using ritual food ash and dead animals to mark a path. I returned to the west room and examined the dust on the floor. Mixed into it were red soil fragments of leaves and tiny white grains that resembled old lime. "Where did your family go on the night of the ghost festival?" I asked. Young Suhong looked at her husband before answering. The young ancestral graves were on Shiling Mountain, about 6 miles west of the village. Every year, the family visited during Qingming and the Ghost Festival. That evening, the three of them left shortly after 6. They parked at the foot of the mountain and followed the familiar path on foot. Around 7:30, they saw a small brick structure beneath an old banyan tree. People in the area called it a shrine, but there was no sign above the door. There were no statues inside. Young Li told his parents that he had once taken shelter there during a storm, about a month earlier. I interrupted young Suhong. He had entered that place before the ghost festival. She nodded. He went up alone to clear weeds near the family graves. Rain came suddenly. He said he waited inside until it passed. Did he change afterward? Young Suhong thought for a moment. He slept more. A few times I heard him speaking in his room, but when I opened the door, he was not on the phone. Young Jibang added something else. 3 days before the festival, I saw an old wooden comb, a powder box, and a pair of copper earrings in his room. He said he had taken them from the shrine by mistake and planned to return them. I looked at him. "Did you know what the building was?" He shook his head. I knew there were old graves in that part of the mountain. I had never entered the structure and did not know who was buried there. I told young Li not to go alone again. Since we were already going to the ancestral graves for the festival, I told him to bring the objects and return them then. When the family reached the shrine, young Li took the old objects from his bag. He carried 2 sticks of incense from the family offerings. Then he went inside. His parents waited near the doorway. About 2 minutes later, fog poured down from a narrow break between the slopes. The banyan tree disappeared behind white mist. Young Suhong and young Jibang heard a woman calling from the path toward the ancestral graves. They assumed another relative had arrived before them and answered. When they turned back, the shrine door was gone. The tree remained in front of them, but the brick structure seemed to have been swallowed by fog. They circled the area for almost 10 minutes before finding the entrance again. Young Li was kneeling before the altar. 2 sticks of incense had been placed in different positions inside a black burner. One stood in the center, facing the memorial tablet. The other had been pushed near the rim, directly over a crack in the floor. Later, I understood that the danger had never been the number of incense sticks. One had been offered to Su Qing with deliberate intent. The second had been lit at the suggestion of something beneath the floor. It was the purpose and placement that formed 2 separate connections. Young Suhong called her son 3 times before he turned around. On the way down the mountain, he could still speak. He only complained of exhaustion and could not remember how long he had been kneeling. At almost 2 the next morning, young Li woke and entered the kitchen. He divided leftover ritual rice into 2 bowls. Then he placed 2 pairs of chopsticks opposite each other. When his mother asked what he was doing, he answered quietly, "The guests have not all arrived." He carried 1 bowl toward the west room. His parents tried to stop him. The bowl fell and shattered in the courtyard. Young Li suddenly displayed strength far beyond what they expected. He shoved both parents aside, grabbed several white candles, and locked himself inside the west room. Through the window, they saw him bite the end of 1 candle. He swallowed only a small amount before vomiting. Then, severe stomach pain and convulsions began at the exact moment the first rooster crowed. The details were more disturbing than a simple attack of madness. Young Li had prepared a meal for 2. He had built a path of candles into a bridal chamber. He had carried home a dead woman's personal belongings. Everything resembled preparation for a wedding ritual. I asked where those objects were now. Young Su-hong led me to her son's bedroom. A paper box wrapped in cloth was hidden in the bottom drawer. Inside were the comb powder box and copper earrings. The comb had cracked along its spine. 2 characters were carved into the wood. Su Qing. Several long, faded strands of hair were caught between the teeth. Red mountain soil covered the bottom of the box. On the back of the comb, 7 small dots had been carved into a curved pattern. Did young Li know anyone named Su Qing? I asked. Both parents said no. I moved my compass near the comb. The needle trembled 3 times and turned west. The wood itself was not magnetic. Whatever moved the needle was not part of the comb. It was something that remained attached to it. I had the family move young Li into the main house. They opened the curtains in the west room and removed every candle offering and ritual object. Young Su-hong asked whether we should go directly to the mountain and call her son's spirit home. We do not yet know who is holding him, I said. If we destroy the wrong thing, we may release something more dangerous than the one we are trying to stop. Before returning to the shrine, I needed its history. That afternoon, we visited a relocation district where former residents of Qinghe Village now lived. Qinghe had once stood near the foot of Shiling Mountain. More than 20 years earlier, a major landslide forced most families to leave. After several conversations, an elderly man named Su Wenbo agreed to speak with us. When he heard the name Su Qing, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "She was my younger sister." Su Qing died 28 years earlier at the age of 20. Her family had once promised her to the son of another household. Before the wedding, the young man died in a vehicle accident. His family still wanted to arrange a ghost marriage and bury the 2 names together. Su Qing refused. She said she had never loved him. She did not want death to bind her to a stranger. A few months later, she became ill with a high fever and died. Her father feared the other family might steal her remains for the ghost marriage. So he buried her secretly on Shiling Mountain. Above the grave, he built a small brick structure disguised as a shrine. I showed Su Wenbo the comb. He recognized it immediately. Our mother gave that to Su Qing when she was 18. When I showed him the 7 dots on the back, his expression changed. They may represent the 7 wooden stakes. Soon after Su Qing was buried, strange incidents began around the mountain. Dogs barked toward the same slope all night. Livestock died without visible injuries. Woodcutters reported hearing their names called from beneath the earth. At that time, a man named Luo Sheng wandered near the village. He was known to rob graves. When villagers discovered him near a disturbed burial site, he fled into the mountain and disappeared. Su Qing's father later suspected someone had buried Luo Sheng near his daughter's grave. He brought a Taoist priest to inspect the site. The priest said a spirit had died below the ground in hunger and terror. No family had buried it properly. No one called its name. Over time, it forgot who it had been. A nameless spirit could not freely leave its burial place, but it could tempt the living into naming it, or it could steal another person's identity. The priest placed 7 wooden stakes around the grave, each carved with a character. He also warned that Su Qing's memorial tablet must never be moved. Su Wenbo remembered one sentence his father repeated: "A nameless dead man cannot cross a doorway that belongs to someone else." Su Qing's name was the final lock. As long as her tablet remained in place, the spirit beneath the floor could not leave using another person's identity. I asked whether the 7 stakes were still intact. Su Wenbo shook his head. 2 years earlier, people digging for ornamental trees had damaged one corner of the structure. He brought out an old black and white photograph. Su Qing had long hair and wore a light blouse. She was not smiling, but her eyes looked calm. A red thread had been tied around her left wrist. Our mother tied it there, Su Wenbo said. She hoped Su Qing would one day meet someone who treated her sincerely. On the drive back, young Jibang remained silent. I asked what else he had kept from us. He looked at his wife. Then he told us about the year young Li was born. The baby had been weak. During his first 2 months, he stopped breathing several times in his sleep. Doctors found no clear defect. They told the family to watch him closely. One night, young Suhong fell asleep beside the cradle. She dreamed of a young woman standing outside the room. A red thread circled the woman's wrist. "The child has not settled inside his body," the woman said. "If no one holds him, something will call him away." The next morning, young Li developed a high fever. But after that day, his breathing slowly stabilized. Beside the cradle, the family found a sheet of yellow paper with 2 lines written across it. In this life, no marriage. Only after returning to dust will the bond be formed. The family assumed a wandering Taoist had left the message, but no one had actually seen anyone enter the house. Then, young Su Hong remembered something she had never told them. When she was 7 months pregnant, she and her husband had gone to the mountain to visit the ancestral graves. A storm began during their descent. They took shelter beneath the roof of the brick structure near the banyan tree. Young Su Hong did not know it was a grave. She wiped dust from the memorial tablet and briefly saw the name Su Qing. When they left, she slipped near the edge of a steep drop. For 1 second, she felt a cold hand support her elbow. That touch kept her from falling. That night, she dreamed of a young woman leading her across a river of black water. Young Su Hong had dismissed it as a pregnancy dream. Now the connection became clear. Su Qing's link to young Li had not begun during the ghost festival. It began before he was born. She had saved his mother on the mountain. Later, she had kept the baby's weak spirit from being drawn away by the thing beneath the shrine. The yellow paper might not have been a curse. It might have been a warning. By the time we returned to the young home, the sun was setting. Young Li was still lying in the main house. The cloth tied around his wrist had not been disturbed. No one had seen him leave the bed, but the wooden comb was gone from the box. No door had opened. I checked the window. A line of narrow red footprints crossed the sill. They were shaped like the feet of a barefoot woman. The prints ended beside young Li's bed. The comb lay beneath his pillow. A long strand of hair rested beside it. Young Li woke as the last light disappeared. "What day is it?" he asked. His mother answered. He counted silently, then turned pale. 1 day left. 1 day until what I asked. He pressed both hands against his head. "I cannot remember." "Do you dream about Su Qing?" He closed his eyes. "She stands in a room with red and white cloth. She asks why I have not come, but someone else is always behind her." "What does the other person look like?" "It has no face, only a dark opening where the mouth should be." "Has Su Qing hurt you?" Young Li slowly shook his head. "She tells me not to eat what the other one offers. Every time I wake up, I smell wax, so I thought she was making me eat it. But in the dreams, she keeps knocking those things out of my hands." That was the most important statement we had heard. Su Qing was not feeding him the offerings. She was trying to stop something else. I asked young Li to remember the first time he entered the shrine. He had gone alone to clear weeds near the family graves. When heavy rain began, he ran inside the brick structure. There were no statues, only a dusty memorial tablet and several old personal objects. He wiped the dust away and read the name Su Qing. The dates showed that she had died at 20. He felt sorry for her. "You died so young," he said. "If you were alive now, maybe you would already have a family. The left side of the tablet had a blank area where a husband's name might have been added. For reasons he could not explain, Yang Li joked, "If no one else is willing to marry you, I will." A splinter cut his finger. When he wiped rainwater from the tablet, he left a bloody fingerprint inside the empty space. A woman's voice spoke behind him. "Do you mean it?" Yang Li turned. No one was there. When he left, he carried away the comb powder box and earrings. He could not clearly remember deciding to take them. The only thought in his mind was that the rain would damage them, and that he should protect them until he could return. 3 days before the ghost festival, Su Qing appeared in a dream. But it was not the first dream. For almost a month, she had spoken with him from behind a hanging curtain. At the time, Yang Li felt directionless. The repair shop was cutting staff. A woman he once cared about was preparing to marry someone else. He was not suicidal, but he felt as though his life had stopped moving. In the dreams, Su Qing asked about his work, his parents, and the things he never told anyone. She did not demand anything. She simply listened. Yang Li understood that she was not alive. Still, he believed the repeated dreams were only products of his own mind. 3 nights before the festival, Su Qing appeared in a red wedding dress. "Does the promise you made in the shrine still count?" she asked. Yang Li knew he was dreaming. He thought for several seconds. Then he said, "It counts." She asked a second question. "Will you allow me to wait for you?" He answered, "Yes." She told him to return her belongings during the ghost festival. After that, his memory became fragmented. I asked about the incense. 1 stick was for her, he said. 1 was for the person under the floor. How did you know anyone was under there? I did not. A voice in my head said, I had to light 2. It said, Su Qing could not leave the tablet if I lit only 1. Did she warn you? She told me not to light the second stick, but I had already placed it in the burner. That second offering opened the damaged part of the seal. From that night forward, a part of Yang Li's consciousness remained trapped at the shrine. Su Qing held it because of their bond. But she also used that bond to keep the nameless spirit from taking him completely. If I pulled him home without repairing the seal, the thing below could follow. I decided to go up the mountain the next morning. That night, I stayed in the Yang home. I tied a red thread from Yang Li's little finger to a small bronze bell outside the door. The thread itself had no supernatural power. It was only an alarm. At 1:40 in the morning, the bell rang. Yang Li had not moved, yet the thread was stretching toward the window, as though something invisible were pulling his finger from outside. I touched his wrist. His skin was cold. His pulse was weak. Footsteps crossed the courtyard. Slow, light. Each step separated by exactly 3 beats. Through the crack in the door, I saw a woman standing beneath the eaves. She wore dark red, Her hair fell over her shoulders. Her face remained hidden in shadow. She did not enter the room. She raised one hand and pointed toward the west building. I followed with a lantern. The west room door stood open, although I had locked it myself. The 14 pieces of candle had been arranged again. 2 rows formed a path across the floor. At the end stood the black incense burner. Inside was a burned fragment of wood. One character had been carved into it. Bind. I understood the 7 dots behind the comb. They represented the 7 wooden stakes around the grave. One stake had been broken. A fragment of it had entered the incense burner and followed young Li home. The woman's shadow appeared behind the doorway. Su Qing, I asked. A voice entered my mind. Tomorrow, before the sun stands overhead. If you are late, he will find his name. Whose name? His own. The spirit beneath the shrine had forgotten who it was. That had kept it trapped. But during 6 days of attachment to young Li, it had begun taking his memories. If it recovered its true name or accepted young Li's identity as its own, the old seal would no longer hold it. When I turned again, the woman was gone. The next morning, I took only young Suhong up the mountain. Young Jibang stayed with his son. I told him that if the bronze bell rang 9 times without stopping, he was to burn the paper talisman in a bowl of salt water, open every east-facing window, and call me. The trail up Shiling Mountain was narrow and slick. Red soil clung heavily to our shoes. After 40 minutes, the old banyan tree appeared through the mist. The shrine stood beneath it. It was smaller than I expected. The red brick had turned brown beneath moss. There was no sign over the entrance. No carved couplets. No statues. Only a faded strip of cloth hanging above the door. Half red, half white. Young Suhong stopped several feet away. That cloth was not there last time. Perhaps you were not allowed to see it then. Do you mean the shrine changes? Not exactly. Some places remain the same. What changes is how much they allow the visitor to see. Inside the shrine, less than 70 square feet. Su Qing's memorial tablet stood on the altar. Her birth and death dates were carved on the right. On the left, where there had once been empty wood, the name Young Li had appeared in dark red strokes. A fingerprint lay beneath it. I did not touch the tablet. I examined the floor first. Small holes had been hidden beneath soil along the corners and sides of the room. 5 wooden stakes remained intact. 1 was broken. 1 was missing. The surviving stakes carried 6 carved characters between them. Settle, soul, steady, spirit, seal, door. The burned fragment from the Yang house carried the character bind. Together they formed an unfinished command. Settle the soul, steady the spirit, seal the door, bind. The final word was missing. I looked at Su Qing's tablet. Ash covered the back. When I wiped it clean, a small character appeared. Entity, settle the soul, steady the spirit, seal the door, confine the wandering spirit. The 7 wooden stakes formed the outer seal. Su Qing's memorial tablet stood at the center as the 8th and final lock. If it was broken or moved, the spirit below could escape. I returned the 6 usable stakes to their positions. For the missing point, I carved a temporary replacement from peachwood. As I scattered cinnabar along the connecting lines, something scratched beneath the bricks. Young Suhong stepped backward. Is something under there? No matter whose voice you hear, do not answer. The moment I finished speaking, young Jibang's voice came from below. Suhong, open the door. She froze. The voice was perfect. Suhong, something happened to young Li. She moved without thinking. I caught her arm. Your husband is more than 6 miles away. The voice changed. Now it was young Li. Mom, I am cold. Young Suhong began to cry, but she covered her mouth and refused to respond. I placed one of young Li's shirts before the memorial tablet. Then I tied a strand of his hair around Su Qing's comb. Take 1 stick of incense down the mountain, I told her. Keep calling young Li home. What will you do? I have to speak with the one holding the missing part of him. What if she refuses to let go? Then I will find another way. Whatever you hear behind you, do not turn around. Young Suhong accepted the incense. Before leaving, she looked at Su Qing's tablet. If you truly saved my son, I thank you, but he is still alive. Please give him back. The incense flame trembled in a room without wind. After young Suhong disappeared down the path, I closed the shrine door. I placed the comb before the tablet. Then I called Su Qing's name 3 times. The first time, nothing happened. The second time, the red and white cloth above me began to move. The third time, a line of water appeared on the wooden tablet. A young woman stepped from behind an old curtain. She wore a dark red wedding dress. Her face was not broken or decayed. She looked like the woman in Su Wenbo's photograph, only paler. A red thread circled the little finger of her left hand. The other end led to the shadow of a young man sitting beside the altar. It was the missing part of young Li's consciousness. Su Qing looked at me. Have you come to sever the bond? I came to return a living man to the living. If you cut the thread, the thing below will follow him. I know. Then why take him away? His body cannot survive much longer without this part of him. Su Qing looked toward young Li. I only meant to hold him until the seal was repaired. If protection was your only reason, why did you prepare a bridal chamber? She said nothing. Why did you place his name on your tablet? Because he agreed. You asked him in a dream. He knew he was dreaming. He answered me twice. I do not deny the promise, but you never told him the cost. Su Qing lowered her eyes. The scratching beneath the floor grew louder. A man's rough voice rose from the crack. She is lying. A thin split opened between the bricks. Black vapor leaked upward with the smell of wet earth and old wax. She wants a living husband. She is no different from me. Su Qing turned toward the floor. The red thread in her hand tightened. I asked, "Did you make Yang Li eat the offerings?" "No." "Did you send the burner and the broken stake to his home?" The thing below placed the wood in the burner. When Yang Li lit the second incense stick, it used the smoke to attach itself to him. Why did you not return his consciousness when you saw his body weakening? Because it would have gone with him. You could have asked someone for help. Su Qing remained silent for a long time. Then she admitted the truth. At first, I kept him to stop the thing below. Later, I knew I could reach others through dreams. But I waited. Why? I was afraid that once he returned, he would forget me. That confession made her more believable than any claim of innocence. Su Qing was not selfless. She had spent nearly 30 years alone inside the shrine. When Yang Li left his blood on the tablet, spoke to her in dreams, and repeated his promise, she saw an end to that loneliness. She held him to protect him. She also held him because she did not want to be alone again. A laugh rose beneath us. You all want him. How are you different from me? Black vapor poured from the crack and gathered into the shape of a thin man. There was no face, only a dark opening where a mouth should have been. The wooden stakes began to shake. The temporary beechwood stake split along its center. The entity called one name, Yang Li. The shadow beside the altar jerked forward. Su Qing pulled the red thread tight. I threw my string of 5 emperor coins around the crack. For several seconds, the black vapor could not cross the circle, but the entity had been attached to Yang Li for 6 days. It knew his name, his voice, his memories, his fear. If it reached the missing part of his consciousness, it would have a complete identity and a path out of the shrine. I turned to Su Qing. You have to choose. If you keep Yang Li here, his living energy will continue weakening the seal. When it breaks, neither of you will survive what comes through. If I release him, does the promise remain? The promise does not disappear, but a vow made freely becomes corrupted the moment one side uses it to steal the other's life. Su Qing looked at Yang Li. The entity called his name again. This time, his shadow stood and faced the crack. Su Qing pulled the thread, but her strength was failing. At last, she untied it from her own finger. Yang Li, she said, go home. The thread did not break. It slipped from her hand and became a faint red light around his wrist. Outside, far down the mountain, young Su Hong's voice rose through the trees. Yang Li, come home. His shadow turned toward the sound. The nameless entity screamed and surged from the floor. Su Qing stepped between them. Black vapor passed through her body. Her shape began to dissolve. In that brief opening, I used the line of incense smoke entering through the door to guide Yang Li away. His shadow disappeared from the shrine. From the mountainside came young Su Hong's cry. The smoke is straight now. The entity lost its target and turned toward me. 5 wooden stakes tore free at once. I drove the temporary stake back into the 7th position. Then I fitted the burned fragment marked bind into the broken stake. The formation still did not close. Su Qing's memorial tablet had tilted away from its original place. I stepped toward it. Then my master's voice spoke behind me. Xue Mang, stop. I froze. The voice was nearly perfect. Your master died in the fire, it whispered. Why do you keep trying to return to him? I knew it was false. My master was alive. He was the one who had sent me down the mountain. But the thing beneath the shrine was doing more than imitating sound. It was searching my memory for fears I had never spoken aloud. The eastern stake burst free again. The ring of coins scattered across the floor. Black smoke wrapped around my right wrist. My entire hand went numb. Su Qing tried to steady the tablet, but her body was too weak. Half her face dissolved into mist. I forced the eastern stake back into place. Then, young Su Hong's voice called from outside. Master Xue, my son is dead. I did not answer. The voice changed into a crying child. Then it became my own. Open the door. That is all you need to do. I understood what it wanted. If I answered one of those voices, it could use my acknowledgement as a path. I clenched my teeth and lifted the memorial tablet with my left hand. The temporary stake continued to split. I had one chance left. I looked at Su Qing. If you return to the tablet, you will remain trapped until your remains can be moved properly. For how long? Weeks, perhaps longer. Will you come back? I will find your brother and notify the local authorities. This time, you will not be left alone. Su Qing looked toward the door. What about Yang Li? I cannot answer for him. The remaining red thread around her wrist trembled. A quiet voice came through it. Wait until I recover. It was Yang Li. I could not tell whether it was a memory left in the thread or his true voice reaching back from far away. Su Qing closed her eyes. Then she stepped backward into the memorial tablet. I returned it to the center of the formation. With blood from my fingertip, I restored the faded final character on the back. All 8 points locked together. The black vapor was pulled toward the crack. It screamed the names Yang Li, Yang Su Hong, Yang Qibang, and finally, mine. Every name was pronounced correctly, but none belonged to it. Just before the floor closed, it spoke one final sentence. I remember my name. I held the stake down. The vapor collapsed inward. Lo! The last sound was cut off. The bricks settled. The shrine became quiet. I slid against the wall. My right hand was so cold I could not bend the fingers. A high ringing filled both ears. I did not leave the mountain until afternoon. Young Suhong stood on a flat section of the trail, holding the nearly burned out incense. She had not turned around, even when she heard me approach. I walked ahead of her. You can look now. She turned. What happened to my son? The missing part of him followed you home. But we need to move quickly. When we reached the courtyard, the bronze bell outside the main house was ringing without pause. Young Jibang knelt beside the bed. Young Li's skin was cold. His breathing was shallow. The red mark from his little finger had climbed almost to his elbow. I opened the east-facing window. Then I lit one stick of incense from the flame I had carried down from the shrine. I called Young Li's name 3 times. The first time, his finger moved. The second time, his breathing deepened. The third time, the bell stopped. I wrapped Su Qing's comb in red cloth and placed it beneath his pillow. Then I drew a small stabilizing mark on his wrist with cinnabar. 10 minutes later, he opened his eyes. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. Mom, he whispered. You called me, did you not? Young Suhong held him. Tears moved down the sides of Young Li's face. She pushed me out. When he became stronger, he described what he remembered. Su Qing had stood before a dark doorway. She kept the faceless figure from crossing. Young Li remembered accusing her of trapping him. He also remembered the moment she removed the thread and told him to go home. I promised her twice, he said. Does the promise still exist? I placed a copy of the inscription from the tablet before him. The first statement was careless, but your blood turned it into an offer. In the dream, you knew who you were speaking to and confirmed it again. A bond was formed. Young Jibang asked, did my son complete a ghost marriage num? The wedding was never completed. Su Qing released him and agreed to wait until his natural life is over. She has no right to shorten it. Young Suhong asked whether her son could still marry a living woman someday. That decision belongs to Young Li, I said. The bond exists, but his life in this world is still his own. If he one day truly wishes to build a family, no dream from the past should force him to remain alone. Young Li was silent. At last he said, I will not decide now. It was a wiser answer than any vow. I told the family to continue his medical care. His stomach and low body temperature still required treatment. Over the next several days, the abnormal symptoms began to fade. The case at the shrine was not over. I contacted Su Wenbo. Together, we reported the hidden grave to the village authorities. Because the structure stood on abandoned land with unclear ownership, the grave had to be verified before anyone could open the floor. The process took nearly 2 weeks. When workers finally opened the floor, they found Su Qing's coffin on the eastern side. About 6 feet to the west was a second burial pit. There was no coffin. Inside lay the skeleton of a man. A rusted length of chain remained around one wrist. The excavation stopped immediately. County police secured the site and compared old missing person records. Near the skull, investigators found a corroded metal tag. After cleaning it, they recovered a name: Luo Sheng. Su Wenbo confirmed that this was the grave robber who had disappeared decades earlier. Old village accounts suggested that Luo Sheng had been chased after disturbing several graves. The villagers believed he escaped. More likely, he fell into the pit and died. Someone then buried him in secret to avoid responsibility. The thing beneath the shrine had truly been Luo Sheng. Before the seal closed, it had almost recovered its own name. After the investigation ended, Luo Sheng's remains were handled according to local procedure. Su Qing's remains were moved to a proper cemetery near her parents. Her old memorial tablet was buried with her. When the coffin was opened, a decayed red thread was found around her left wrist. The wooden comb was not inside. Yang Li kept it. That night, Su Wenbo dreamed of his sister. Su Qing was not wearing a wedding dress. She wore the light blouse from the old photograph and stood beside a bright river. "I do not have to guard the door anymore," she told him. Before leaving, she asked him to deliver one message to Yang Li. "A promise is not a chain. When you understand what you truly want, choose for yourself." Yang Li rested for almost a month before returning to work. His sleep returned. He stopped arranging candles. He no longer searched for offerings after dark. Follow-up examinations showed only mild irritation in his stomach. Later, he mailed me an envelope. Inside were my payment, a photograph of the banyan tree, and a short letter. The brick shrine had been removed. A small marker now recorded that the ground had once held Su Qing's grave. It was not a place of worship. It was simply a name returned to someone who had been forgotten. Yang Li wrote, "I do not know whether what existed between us was love, gratitude, or the result of a careless promise. But I will live honestly until I understand." Months later, Yang Jibang brought me the yellow paper found beside Yang Li's cradle. The two large lines were familiar. "In this life, no marriage. Only after returning to dust will the bond be formed." But under the fold, a smaller line appeared. "Meeting Qing means life." The word Qing could refer to Su Qing. It could also suggest clarity, purity, or awakening. Prophecies are dangerous because people often understand them only after events have already happened. Then, any detail can be forced to look like fate. I returned to the temple and showed the paper to my master. He opened a fire-damaged notebook. On page 17 was a case from 23 years earlier. A baby from the Yang family had repeatedly stopped breathing in his sleep. The mother dreamed of a young woman standing beside the cradle. The woman called herself Su Qing. She said, "The child passed near my doorway before he was born. I will hold him here once. When he is old enough to choose, allow him to answer for himself." My master had written the message on a yellow paper and left it by the cradle. He had never signed it because he feared the family would search for the grave before the seal beneath it could be handled safely. The origin of the prophecy was finally clear. There had been no mysterious second Taoist, no hidden stranger forging messages. Su Qing had protected young Li when he was an infant. That did not give her ownership over his life. Years later, young Li entered the shrine by choice. He left his blood on the tablet. He made the promise. Fate brought them near each other. But the final decision remained theirs. Several months later, I returned to Qinghe Village. Young Li was repairing a tractor in the courtyard. He looked healthy again. The comb remained inside a glass case in his bedroom. The name Su Qing was still visible along the spine. The 7 dots on the back had begun to fade after the grave was moved. "I still dream about her," young Li said. "Does she ask you to cross the river Nam? She only stands on the other side. Do you want to go to her?" He shook his head. "Not yet." I asked whether he intended to wait for her forever. Young Li considered the question. "Maybe I will love someone living one day. Maybe I will never marry. I do not know. But whatever I choose, I will not treat my promise to Su Qing as a debt that requires me to die early." Before leaving, I looked at the comb one final time. In the reflection of the glass, a young woman seemed to be standing beneath a tree outside. She wore a light blouse. A red thread circled her wrist. When I turned around, no one was there. Only wind moving through the courtyard. My right hand eventually recovered, but the little finger never regained full sensation. Whenever rain approaches, or when I stand near incense that has burned in the same place for too many years, the fingertip becomes cold. It feels as though an invisible thread has tightened around it. My master told me it was not a curse, only a mark, a reminder that I once stood before a door that should never have opened, and almost allowed the thing behind it to borrow my name. Since then, I no longer say that every abandoned shrine contains a demon. Some are only forgotten graves. Some spirits do not intend to harm the living, yet loneliness can still make them selfish. And some things truly are dangerous. They wait beneath thin layers of brick. They wait for someone to light incense in the wrong place. They wait for the living to call the correct name. So if you ever find a nameless shrine deep in the mountains with no caretaker and no sign of recent visitors, do not enter casually. Do not touch the memorial tablet. Do not take anything home. Do not burn incense when you do not know who will receive it. And never stand before the name of someone dead and make a promise simply because you believe they cannot hear you. The living may forget their words by morning, but to someone who has waited alone for many years, a promise may be the only thing they have left.
The official report may close the case, but not every file stays silent. Some roads still wait in the dark. Some names are still missing from the record, and some witnesses never truly leave the places they survived. If another file is found, if another voice comes forward, I will open the archive again. Until then, this is Shen Yu, the Raven Archivist, and this file is now closed.